15.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah McDonald, and I work for the National Marine Sanctuaries. Today, I'm coming to you from the Inner Space Center here at the University of Rhode Island. The rest of the expedition team is out off the coast of Massachusetts on board the research vessel Connecticut, which is operated by the University of Connecticut. Right now, you're looking at some drone footage shot yesterday of the expedition team on board the research vessel Connecticut in Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. So the expedition team is out in Stellwagen Bank looking at the seafloor for different types of ecosystems and shipwrecks. This expedition was funded from NOAA, or the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution to conduct the latest and greatest state-of-the-art ocean research using marine technology and the technology that allows us to connect to you today. So they're sending data and video up to a satellite, down back to us here at the University of Rhode Island, to the ship and to your classrooms, allowing us to bring what was once inaccessible right to your screen. So during this program, it's going to be interactive, which means that you get to talk to the expedition team. And the way that it's going to work is that we're going to have designated question and answer periods with our research team. So I will cue Joe, the host of Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, to open the floor to your classroom to ask these questions. So these questions can be anything about, hey, what marine species did we just see? To, how did you get your job as a marine scientist? The team is super eager to hear from you, so make sure to remember your questions. Today's program is specifically focused on the science part of the expedition. So we're going to bring in our biology and archaeology principal investigators to the screen so that you can ask them questions. For an overall view of what this expedition has looked like, I'm going to show you a video now.
842 square miles,
2.5 in this video.
100 feet deep, enough to submerge the Seattle Space Needle, the final resting place of hundreds of shipwrecks, and one of the top 10 whale-watching destinations in the world. Created in 1992, Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary lies 25 miles off the coast of Boston. It's home to a rich assortment of marine life, including Atlantic cod, haddock, flounder, bluefin tuna, and many species of whales, including the critically endangered North Atlantic right whale. And all this life attracts many visitors. Over 500,000 whale watchers visit the sanctuary each year. The crossroads of critical fishing grounds and shipping routes for centuries, Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary also contains vast numbers of shipwrecks, ranging from wooden sailing ships to modern fishing trawlers. These wrecks are both windows into the past and important habitats for marine life. Stellwagen Bank Sanctuary is one of 14 marine protected areas within the National Marine Sanctuary System, a network encompassing more than 600,000 square miles of underwater parks. Managed by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the sanctuaries promote responsible, sustainable use of ocean and Great Lakes resources. They also serve to connect people to the ocean so they can better understand its critical roles in climate, weather, and human health. To foster that connection, NOAA awarded funding to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, often referred to as WHOI, to conduct state-of-the-art research. Based on nearby Cape Cod, WHOI is the world's oldest and largest nonprofit ocean research and education institution. Using tools and technologies pioneered at Woods Hole, we can bring live dives, research, and exploration over the internet in real time to you.
As you may have picked up in that video, Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary has a vast number of shipwrecks. Now, shipwrecks are caused for many different reasons. One of those reasons is treacherous weather. So, an expedition update is that the team is not actually over top of the steam vessel Portland Shipwreck, which they were at yesterday. They are closer to shore off of the coast of Massachusetts to seek shelter from some rough conditions. So, this is footage from earlier today of the rough seas that were out there. So we're still going to run the live program, but we're going to show you remotely operated vehicle feed from this summer that we collected of the Portland instead of a live feed. So that's the only change from the Portland, but the ship is not in Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary, but our team is still eager to talk to you about our expedition. With that being said, I would like to gauge the audience and see how many of you have heard of the Portland before. So I can see a few different classrooms. So if you've heard of the Portland before today's program, could I get a show of hands? Awesome. It looks like we have a classroom with a few people raising their hand. I will turn it over to Ben Haskell, who's the Deputy Superintendent of Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary, to give you a little bit of an overview of Portland's history. Hi, Ben.
Hey, Hannah. Hey, classrooms. How are you doing today? I'm so glad you could join us out here on the research vessel Connecticut. And as Hannah explained, unfortunately, due to weather, we're not over the Portland right now, but it's good to be able to talk to you anyway. And I wanted to explain a little bit about the history of the Portland itself. But it's been 16 years since I last observed this wreck on the seafloor in Stellwagen Bank Sanctuary. And I'm really excited to be able to hopefully get back to her tomorrow if the weather lets up. But I wanted to show you what the wreck or the Portland looked like before she went down in a gale in 1898. So this was a side paddle wheel steamer. I'm going to use my handy dandy Marlin Spike pointer here. A side paddle wheel steamer that went from Boston to Portland overnight. And that meant she was called a night boat. She would carry her passengers over the course of the night. What powered the side wheels, paddle wheels was the steam engine, which is located in this area, and that powered the walking beam, which went up and down and turned the paddle wheels. So she was designed for coastal travel in protected waters, and she was not supposed to be really offshore, but that's where the company decided to use this particular vessel. And that's why she got into trouble on November 26, 1898. Captain Hollis Blanchard decided to leave Boston on time at 7 p.m. and head for Portland. Well, the minute he turned the corner of Cape Ann, where Gloucester is, he headed right into the teeth of a howling gale. And he tried to make headway, but the waves and wind were just too much for the vessel. So he turned south, headed back south towards Cape Cod, and eventually the waves, which were 30, 40 foot high, if you can imagine that, started to tear apart the upper superstructure of the steamship, and eventually waves made it inside the hull, and she sank very quickly with all hands on board. Over 192 people. We're not sure exactly how many because they didn't sure, but they started to do that after this tragedy. So she went down in this gale. And a lot of the crew members were actually African Americans from Portland, Maine, and they were members of the Abyssinian Meeting House, which had to close its doors because they lost so many members. So to this day, she remains New England's greatest maritime disaster, with over 192 people lost. and we like to try to get back to her every year if possible. Sometimes the weather prevents that, but she's experiencing a lot of changes due to natural forces as well as human impacts from fishing gear. And so, you know, these historic wrecks are constantly changing in the marine environment. And because she's our most iconic and most important wreck, we try to get back as often as possible. So with that, Hannah, I think I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ben. And thanks for the great explanation of the iconic Portland. I'm going to turn it over to Joe to ask a classroom to answer this question. Why do you think the study of shipwrecks is important?
All right, that's an excellent question. I'm going to pick a classroom right now. I'm going to go to Mrs. Jasso's class. I'm going to turn their microphone on. And if you guys want to take a crack at that question, why is it so important to study shipwrecks?
So why is it so important to study shipwrecks? Who wants to answer? We have a hand up right over here. Go ahead. So we can learn about the past and what?
Make the newer ships better.
To make newer ships better.
Oh.
Good. Is there anyone else that wants to answer one more answer? Jared. Why is it important to look at the past shipwrecks? So we can discover more about history. Awesome.
All right, I think those are some pretty good answers, Hannah.
Yeah, I would agree. So Miss Jasso's class said that shipwrecks provide an insight into looking at history, into the past, and they also provide us insight on how to make ships better. So Kelvin, who is the lead archaeologist on this expedition, he's also on board the research vessel Connecticut. Welcome, Kelvin. What do you think of their answer?
I think they're great answers. Absolutely. Shipwrecks are a window into the past, so we can learn about the mistakes that were made and make ships better. In fact, when I teach my students, what I tell them is that a shipwreck is ultimately a mistake, a tragic mistake. There's never been a ship designed to sink. And when we go out there, we're looking at that moment, the most human moment that we all have is a mistake with very tragic consequences. And those consequences have been happening for thousands of years on the sea. In fact, one estimate is that around the world, there's over 3 million shipwrecks. That's a lot of hard-learned lessons. And even in Massachusetts, we have over 3,500 shipwrecks. And our project is to focus on the one Portland, which sank in 1898. So we understand why it sank. And as a maritime archaeologist, it's my job to go down and start to piece the clues together like an underwater detective. It's very exciting, but I can't go down myself at a depth of 500 feet where the Portland rests. Instead, I rely on an amazing team who put together some of the best technology in the world, including right behind me, this cute little guy is the ROV, a remote underwater operated vehicle, which is like an underwater drone, to go under and take pictures, gorgeous pictures of the bow, of the paddle wheel that turned, the ships would go forward and maybe that broke, and also very intimate artifacts such as plates and cups. These were the dinnerware that the 193 passengers might have eaten on that night when the ship sank. And I have that responsibility to go out there and try to figure out what happened so we can learn from the past for the present, and also to give voice to these people who their final resting place. One of the important parts of a shipwreck is we have to understand that this is really a memorial. This is a gravesite. People did not get to go home to their family and loved ones. They were going from Boston to Portland, and there's quite a bit of responsibility in telling that story. So, with the excitement of exploration, we have to understand that maritime archaeology is not just about the ships, 3 million around the world, but also about the people, both in the past and today. And you're part of that story too. The reason we're out here is so we can share it with you. With technology, we can create virtual models to bring to your classroom so you can understand that story. It's a wonderful field, and it's out there. As you can see, we're on the ocean right now. We'd like to be a little bit further out on the Portland, but you know, the weather, nature, you can't control nature. And another part of a shipwreck is it becomes part of nature. It becomes part of an ecosystem where life flourishes. And one of my joys on this project is I'm working with an amazing biologist who studies how shipwrecks become habitats, and she can tell you way better than I can. So I'd like to turn it back to Hannah, who can introduce you to her. And with that, Hannah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kelvin. That was great. And Pixel looks great behind you as well. So Kelvin was right. We are going to connect with the biology lead, Kirsten. But I want to turn it over to Joe to see if one of the classrooms can have a question specifically for Kirsten, who studies the biology on these wrecks.
All right, absolutely. So classrooms, I'm looking into your classrooms right now. If you have a question about the biology, the animals, the marine species living on the shipwreck, put your hand up and I'll pick your classroom and we'll go in there and pick that question. So it looks like our group in Maine, they've got their hands up. So let me get their microphone turned on. How we doing, Miss Whipple's class?
Good.
All right, who's got a question about the marine life on the shipwreck?
How you found any new species growing on the shipwreck?
That is a great question. So Kirsten, we have a question coming from a classroom in Maine, and they want to know if we found any new species growing on the shipwreck.
So I'm going to go with the usual definition of new species, meaning that it's something yet unknown to science and undescribed, and tell you that I'm not quite sure yet. So identifying species is a really tricky game. You have to really have a physical specimen in your hands in order to dissect in the laboratory, look at on a microscopic level, and compare to published descriptions of known species to be able to identify them. And unfortunately, because of the poor weather today, we weren't able to collect those physical specimens. I'm doing my best job that I can with photographs of known described species, comparing those to the ROV video to try to identify the species that we have there. I suspect that most of the things living on the wreck are already described species. There's always that outstanding chance, especially with deep water research, that something might be new, but I'll know more about that as I continue to do my analysis.
Awesome, Kirsten. And can you tell us a little bit more about how you're studying this wreck as a habitat for marine life?
Absolutely. So I view shipwrecks as isolated island-like habitat. Most of them are surrounded by just sand or mud plains, and this is absolutely the case for the Portland. So the shipwreck provides the only hard surface. It's the only solid object in that area, which means that for species that have to settle on a hard surface, things that are sessile, that means they live in only one place attached to a surface for their whole life, they need that shipwreck. And so the most common things we see on the Portland are sponges, anemones, and hydroids. These are all examples of sessile organisms. One of the common anemones is called the frilled anemone, Metridium spinile is its scientific name. And it's got hundreds and hundreds of tentacles, and it's really common, especially on the bow. So I'm looking at those communities, first of all, identify what species are there, and second, to understand the community structure. I do this by taking the ROV video and converting it into still images, just frame grabs, which I then overlay with some randomly placed points so I can count how many points hit each species back in my lab and try to estimate the percent cover. This lets me understand what are the relative abundances. Is one species dominating the whole community, or is it more even? How are they arranged? Are things more on the top of the wreck? Are they clustered together or spread out, etc.? And once I understand those community patterns, that community structure, I can compare the data to previously recorded footage from the Portland in previous expeditions, and for the first time really describe and understand how the wreck community is changing over time. So I'm really excited to continue with the analysis with the ROV footage that we have. There's a lot of exciting biology going on, and I'll hand back to you, Hannah.
Awesome. Thank you, Kirsten, for the great overview of the biology.